When we think of Grade 1 listed buildings in the United Kingdom, we think of the likes of St Paul's Cathedral in London or the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh. Would you immediately think of a 19th century church in a small Staffordshire town? Well, St Giles's Church here in Cheadle is one of those Grade 1 listed buildings, and if we go inside, we will see why. Welcome back. Today we are in the beautiful St Giles's Church here in Cheadle in Staffordshire, and it was designed by the architect Augustus Pugin. It's absolutely beautiful. It's in the Victorian Gothic Revival style. It's a place I've always wanted to come and visit. St Giles's Church is a Roman Catholic church and was designed by Augustus Welby Northmore Pugin and built between 1841 and 1846 for the Earl of Shrewsbury. The interior is painted throughout and is floored with patterned tiles. Almost all the furniture and fittings were designed by Pugin himself. The history of St Giles begins with the establishment of a Catholic mission in Cheadle by Father William Waring, a future Bishop of Northampton. He was an assistant to Thomas Baddeley at Cresswell, and in the early 1820s he opened a small chapel in a private house in Charles Street, Cheadle. Among those attending Mass there was Charles Talbot, 15th Earl of Shrewsbury. As Waring's efforts bore fruit, the room became inadequate for the growing numbers, and Lord Shrewsbury asked him to look for large premises. Eventually, he obtained on the Earl's behalf a building about 60 feet in length, which had been built as an armoury for the local militia during the Napoleonic Wars, and the adjoining adjutant's house. This was converted into the new chapel, and the first resident priest was James Jeffreys, appointed in 1827. In the same year, the 15th Earl of Shrewsbury died and was succeeded by his nephew John Talbot as the 16th Earl. Earl John made Alton Abbey his principal residence and renamed it Alton Towers. The Earl was zealous in promoting the Catholic cause following the 1829 Emancipation Act, and it was he who first brought Pugin to North Staffordshire in the autumn of 1837, initially as an architect and interior designer at the Towers. Convinced that Pugin was the greatest acquisition the church had made for some time, the Earl soon resolved that he would make financial contributions only to churches designed by Pugin and built under his supervision. As the Earl's architect, Pugin paid frequent and sometimes lengthy visits to Alton Towers, a convenient base from which to supervise progress on his various buildings in the Midlands. St Giles was vastly different in concept and design from the mean-looking chapels such as the converted armoury in Cheadle, in which Catholics were accustomed to worship under the Toleration Act. Different too from the fashionable city chapels such as that in Warwick Street, Soho, the Church of Our Lady of the Assumption and St Gregory, where the Talbot family worshipped when in London. Both kinds were, according to Pugin, wholly unfit for their purpose. At St Giles's, Pugin was able to further develop ideas from the recently completed St Mary's Catholic Church in New Toxteth through the assistance of generous funding promised by Lord Shrewsbury. The site for St Giles was marked out by Pugin in 1841, and the church was aligned in such a way to obtain the best possible effect from the street. This meant modifying the traditional east-west alignment and placing the west end close to the frontage of Bank Street to allow the full height of the tower and spire to be seen from the junction of Cross Street and High Street, where the remains of the medieval market cross still stand. Pugin also referred to St Giles as my consolation in all afflictions, and there is no doubt that the freedom from restrictions, the resources available to him at Cheadle, and the enthusiastic support of Lord Shrewsbury compensated somewhat for the professional and personal disappointments he encountered elsewhere. He had suffered under the constraints imposed by church building committees, the indifference of many clergy to his dreams of a Gothic England, and the death in 1844 of his second wife, Louisa. That St Giles's increase in size and splendour as the work progressed was not just the result of Pugin's own enthusiasm for the project and his ability to prize additional sums of money from his patron. Lord Shrewsbury was himself committed to the promotion of the revived Gothic as a means of winning souls, and several of the alterations and additions at Cheadle were suggested by the Earl himself. Great care was taken over the selection of the building materials, which came principally from local sources. There was an abundance of oak and elm on Lord Shrewsbury's Alton estate, and local quarries produced sandstones of various colours and textures. Pugin experienced great difficulty in finding stained glass artists able to make windows to his complete satisfaction, and at the right price. For the Cheadle windows he employed William Wales of Newcastle upon Tyne. Pugin believed that after stained glass, encaustic tiles were amongst the most important forms of decorative art. By the winter of 1843, Pugin was able to tell Lord Shrewsbury that the tiles for Cheadle were proceeding well, and that they would have the finest floor in Europe. The tiles for the chancel and the chapel of the Blessed Sacrament were both rich and expensive. Lord Shrewsbury was concerned that they would be damaged by being constantly walked upon, so he suggested putting down carpets, which in Pugin's view defeated the object of tiles at all. The Clerk of Works, John Denny, suggested a solution. The priest and his assistants would be required to wear special cloth overshoes. Lord Shrewsbury warmed to the idea and told Pugin, "You may have your tiles, and we shall want no carpet." The date for the consecration of St Giles was fixed originally for September 1845, but with the various alterations this proved to be overly optimistic. Pugin noted that the spire was topped on the 27th of June 1845, but the bells did not arrive until January 1846. The consecration of the church was postponed for 12 months, but by March 1846, Pugin could not guarantee even that, unless Lord Shrewsbury would allow him to keep a full workforce, including joiners and painters. Of particular concern were the great crucifix and carved figures for the rood screen, which were being made by George Myers at Lambeth. The loss of the sculptor Thomas Roddice, who died in October 1845, was another sad blow. For although Roddice had completed his works at St Giles by this time, his contribution to the building was substantial and of superb quality. The consecration of St Giles was spread over 2 days, Monday 31st of August and Tuesday 1st of September 1846. Pugin was much involved in the ceremonial preparations and also with practical arrangements for getting guests into the church. Cheadle was not served directly by rail, with the nearest station being Stafford and then transport by horse and carriage. In the evening, Lord Shrewsbury entertained a party of 54 distinguished guests to a dinner at Alton Towers. The more public part of the consecration took place the following morning, St Giles Day, when spectators gathered from miles into the streets of Cheadle to witness sights and sounds not experienced since the Reformation, the procession of 10 Catholic bishops and 2 archbishops in full pontifical robes. The importance of St Giles lies in the fact that everything about it is the product of one brilliant mind. Pugin understood all the principles of Gothic art and architecture and knew how to apply them. His busy schedule allowed time for daily mass as well as morning and evening prayers at home, and he regarded himself first and foremost as a servant of the church, as a builder-up of men's minds and ideas as well as material edifices. It is this which distinguishes Pugin as the principal architect of the Gothic revival, and St Giles as the perfect expression of what he believed an English church should be. But what of the genius Pugin? What do we know of his life? Augustus Welby Northmore Pugin was an English architect, designer, artist and critic with French and Swiss origins. He is principally remembered for his pioneering role in the Gothic revival style of architecture. His work culminated in designing the interior of the Palace of Westminster in Westminster, London, and its clock tower, the Elizabeth Tower, formerly St Stephen's Tower, which houses the bell known as Big Ben. Pugin designed many churches in England and some in Ireland and Australia. Pugin was the son of the French draftsman Auguste Pugin, who had immigrated to England as a result of the French Revolution and had married Catherine Welby of the Welby family of Denton, Lincolnshire. Augustus Pugin was born on the 1st of March 1812 at his parents' house in Bloomsbury, London. As a child, his mother took Pugin each Sunday to the services of the fashionable Scottish Presbyterian preacher Edward Irving at his chapel in Cross Street, Hatton Garden, London. Pugin quickly rebelled against this version of Christianity. Pugin learnt drawing from his father and for a while attended Christ's Hospital. After leaving school, he worked in his father's office, and in 1812 and 1827 accompanied him on visits to France. His first commission, independent of his father, were for designs for furniture at Windsor Castle from the upholsterers Morrell and Seddon. Through a contract made while working at Windsor, he became interested in the design of theatrical scenery, and in 1831 obtained a commission to design the sets for the production of the new opera Kenilworth at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden. In 1831, at the age of 19, Pugin married the first of his 3 wives, Anne Garnet. She died a few months later in childbirth, leaving him a daughter. He had a further 6 children, including the future architect Edward Welby Pugin, with his second wife Louisa Burton, who died in 1844. His third wife, Jane Nill, kept a journal of their marital life from their marriage to 1848 to Pugin's death, which was later published. Their son was the architect Peter Paul Pugin. In 1834, Pugin converted to Catholicism and was received into it the following year. British society at the start of the 19th century often discriminated against dissenters from the Church of England, although things began to change during Pugin's lifetime, helping to make Pugin's eventual conversion to Catholicism more socially acceptable. His second wife died in 1844 and was buried at St Chad's Cathedral, Birmingham, which he had designed. Following the destruction by fire of the Palace of Westminster in London in 1834, Pugin was employed by Sir Charles Barry to supply interior designs for his entry to the architectural competition which would determine who would build the new Palace of Westminster. Pugin also supplied drawings for the entry of James Gillespie Graham. This followed a period of employment when Pugin had worked with Barry on the interior design of King Edward's School in Birmingham. Despite his conversion to Catholicism in 1834, Pugin designed and refurbished both Anglican and Catholic churches throughout England. In February 1852, while travelling with his son Edward by train, Pugin had a total breakdown and arrived in London unable to recognise anyone or speak coherently. For 4 months he was confined to a private asylum, Kensington House. In June he was transferred to the Royal Bethlem Hospital, popularly known as Bedlam. At that time, Bethlem Hospital was opposite St George's Cathedral, Southwark, one of Pugin's major buildings, where he had married his third wife, Jane, in 1848. Jane and a doctor removed Pugin from Bedlam and took him to a private house in Hammersmith, where they attempted therapy, and he recovered sufficiently to recognise his wife. In September, Jane took her husband back to the Grange in Ramsgate, where he died on the 14th of September 1852. He is buried in his church next to the Grange, St Augustine's. On Pugin's death certificate, the cause listed was convulsions followed by coma. Pugin's biographer, Rosemary Hill, suggests that in the last year of his life he had had hyperthyroidism, which would account for his symptoms of exaggerated appetite, perspiration and restlessness. Hill writes that Pugin's medical history, including eye problems and recurrent illness from his early 20s, suggests that he contracted syphilis in his late teens, and this may have been the cause of his death at the age of 40. Pugin's legacy began to fade immediately after his death. This was partly due to the hostility of John Ruskin. Ruskin wrote of Pugin, "He is not a great architect, but one of the smallest possible or conceivable architects." Contemporaries and admirers of Pugin, including Sir Henry Cole, protested at the viciousness of the attack and pointed out that Ruskin's idea on style had much in common with Pugin's. After Pugin's death, Ruskin outlived and out-talked him by a half a century. Sir Kenneth Clarke wrote, "If Ruskin had never lived, Pugin would never have been forgotten." Nonetheless, Pugin's architectural ideas were carried forward by two young architects who admired him and had attended his funeral, W. E. Nesfield and Norman Shaw. George Gilbert Scott, William Butterfield and George Edmund Street were influenced by Pugin's designs and continued to work out the implication of ideas he had sketched in his writings. In Street's office, Philip Webb met William Morris, and they went on to become leading members of the English arts and crafts movement. Morris regarded Pugin as a prominent figure in the first act of the Gothic revival, in which it triumphed as an exotic ecclesiastical style.